Okay, this recording relates to topic 1, demand and supply. And what we're doing is looking at market efficiency, and we're trying to understand what market efficiency is and why it occurs in competitive markets. Now what I've got here is a demand and supply diagram, but I'm going to interpret the points on the demand curve highlighted by red dots and then the points on the supply curve highlighted by the red dots. Because they're actually quite important to the idea of market efficiency, or explaining the idea of market efficiency. So with the demand curve, at the first unit we've got a price on the demand curve, or a value on the demand curve, of $18. What that actually means is that the maximum willingness to pay of a consumer in this market for the first unit is $18. That is the maximum amount they would be willing to pay. The fact is they won't have to pay that because the market price is $10, so they'll only actually pay $10, but they are willing to pay $18. Another way of thinking about that $18 point is if the price was $18.05, then this first consumer in the market wouldn't actually purchase that first unit. So $18.05 is too high, $18 is the absolute maximum. And so what you get then is, for the second unit, $16 is the absolute maximum. Once again, no one's asking that consumer to pay $16, they'll pay $10, but they would be willing to pay $16. So you can interpret the demand curve as a willingness to pay curve. And willingness to pay actually declines for two reasons, depending upon what type of demand curve we have here. It could be a demand curve for an individual person. So the willingness to pay declines as you consume more of the product because of declining marginal utility. If it is a demand curve which is made up of the willingness to pay of multiple people, then what we're actually doing is ranking the people from the highest willingness to pay to the lowest willingness to pay. So an example of that, where you have multiple people along a demand curve, might be the demand curve for tickets to the AFL Grand Final, whereas an example of, with the AFL Grand Final, assuming that you only want to buy one ticket, the other example, or the other possibility is the demand curve is for one person consuming multiple units of a product, and that could be your demand curve for fruit and vegetables over the course of a week or a month. So willingness to pay is one way of interpreting the demand curve. With the supply curve, for the first unit, I've got a value of $2 there. Now, if you have a look at the text on this slide, you'll see I've interpreted that $2 as the minimum willingness to receive. And in economics, that $2 actually represents the variable production costs associated with producing that first unit. So the cost of labour, the cost of electricity, the cost of materials, the additional costs incurred by producing that first unit. Now, what I'm saying here in labelling that point on the supply curve $2, I'm saying that the producer would be willing to accept $2 for the first unit, but no less than $2. It's their minimum willingness to receive. Now, this sometimes creates a little bit of confusion. Some people look at this and think to themselves, well, why would I, as a producer, why would I be willing to supply the first unit at $2 when it's not contributing anything towards my fixed costs? I'm just covering my variable costs by supplying that unit at $2. The fact is that this supplier will actually get $10 for the first unit, not $2. So they'll actually get an $8 that they can contribute towards their fixed costs. We're just going through a thought exercise here, and we're asking ourselves, if we had to, as a producer, what is the absolute minimum we would be willing to pay? Sorry, to receive. The answer is $2. That's just enough to cover our additional or marginal variable costs associated with that first unit of production. Producer will never actually have to receive $2. They'll always get generally a higher price unless the supply curve's horizontal, but we won't go there. But with a normal upward sloping supply curve, you'll never actually get the $2. That'll never be the market price. It's just a thought exercise. So most people should be happy to would be happy to accept a minimum of $2, which would just cover their variable production costs. It would mean that they would just break even on the supply of that unit. Another way of thinking about it is you would be indifferent between supplying that unit at $2 and not supplying it at all. So you should be willing to just cover your variable production costs, theoretically. So what we're assuming here, and we'll see this in the next topic, topic 2, is that we're assuming that production costs rise. Once again, some people initially get confused by this because they think, well, if companies produce more output, won't that lower their production costs? The answer to that is yes, it will, but in the long run. That's called economies of scale. And we are in a time period here called the short run. So in the short run, production costs generally do rise as you produce more, because you've got a constrained level of capital, and the only way you can produce more is to add more labor to the fixed amount of capital, meaning production costs rise. Now that point will become a lot clearer next week in topic 2, so you're just going to have to trust me for now that in the short term, not in the long term, where economies of scale exist, but in the short term, production costs do rise, and that's a reasonable assumption to make. So what we've got here is different interpretations of the demand and supply curves than you would have read about in the textbook. Okay, so now let's go to a situation where we're comparing the maximum willingness to pay and the minimum willingness to receive. Let's focus on unit number 1. And with unit number 1, from society's point of view, unit number 1 should be produced, because we can actually, as a society, spend or incur $2 of costs in producing that unit, but someone out there is willing to pay $18 for it, so they must be getting approximately $18 worth of enjoyment from the consumption of that unit. That's a no-brainer. You produce it for $2, someone gets $18 worth of value out of that, you've got a $16 margin there. Now, of that $16 margin, if you have a look at it carefully, the market price will be 10, so there'll be $8 consumer surplus on that first unit and $8 producer surplus. But we're not really looking at consumer and producer surplus in this market. We're trying to figure out what market efficiency is all about. With a second unit, once again, it's a no-brainer. You should be producing it because it only costs $4 to produce, but it gives someone $16 worth of value when they consume it. Same with the third and the fourth units. At the fifth unit, that's kind of break even. There's no surplus created at that point because the marginal costs of production actually equal the value of the unit. But we still go ahead and produce that fifth unit even though there's no additional surplus being generated, because that's the equilibrium in the market. There'll be someone willing to pay $10 and a supplier happy to supply at $10, so the market will actually move to 5, the equilibrium, even though there is no surplus. The fact that there is no surplus doesn't matter. The market will still move to 5 units. Now, what we then get is this idea that making the 6th unit makes no sense. The 6th unit would have marginal production costs of, let's say, $12. It would have some consumer would be willing to pay, say, $8 for the 6th unit. So you would actually get a situation, if you supplied the 6th unit, of the costs of production exceeding the value of the unit produced. That makes no sense at all. There are no gains from trade there. It's completely illogical that you'd want to push the market out to 6 units. The market by itself will never produce 6 units, of course, because there is no price in this market where 6 could actually be produced. 5 is the maximum, but you could imagine a situation where a government may come along and force the market to produce 6. What I'm saying then is if the market is forced to produce 6, you'll actually be wasting resources because the marginal cost of production will exceed the value of that 6th unit produced. So we know we don't want to go beyond 5 units of production, but we also want to go up to 5 units of production as well. We want units 1, 2, 3, and 4 produced. By producing 5, we are maximizing surplus. We are maximizing the gains from trade between producers and consumers. And so when the market is at equilibrium at 5 units of output, in economics, we call that a point of market efficiency. Technically it's called allocative efficiency, but we're just going to call it efficiency, or a point of efficiency, or market efficiency here. Okay, so to highlight that concept, let's consider a situation where the government comes along and imposes a quota for no good reason and reduces output down to 2 units. The market is now at 2 units rather than 5. Now, with this whole idea of efficiency, inefficiency, in topic 1 here, it's all about how much is produced. So 5 is the efficient output level. Any other output level is what we call inefficient. And I'm about to explain how you can think about inefficient output levels being inefficient. But it's all about the correct output level when we're talking about efficiency. Let's focus on why 2 units of output is an inefficient output level. Let's consider unit number 3. We've already been through this story. Unit number 3 can be produced at a marginal cost of $6. It has a value of $14 to a consumer. It generates $8 worth of benefits, total benefits, or $8 worth of combined consumer and producer surplus. So the 3rd unit should be produced. Same with the 4th unit. It generates surplus of $4. By stopping or preventing the market from producing units number 2 and 3, we are creating inefficiency in the market in the sense that there is unexploited surplus associated with units 2 and 3, unexploited surplus because units 2 and 3 aren't being produced, and that surplus has a total value of $12, $8 for unit 3, $4 for unit 4. So 2 units of output is inefficient in the sense that we have some unexploited surplus that could be generated. We could be enjoying that surplus as a society by allowing the market to produce out to 5. Now, as we'll see later on in the course, if externalities, something called externalities in this exist in this market, then this argument doesn't hold. But just for now, we're assuming that there is just a producer and a consumer, or a group of producers and a group of consumers in the market, and they are the only people with a vested interest in the market. Externalities relate to third parties. We'll worry about that later. But because we have stopped production at 2, we have this unexploited profit. Now you could actually, there is a triangle created here, and it's a triangle of what we call deadweight loss. The triangle is the area to the left of the vertical supply curve, sorry, to the right of the vertical supply curve, above the upward sloping supply curve, and below the demand curve. So that triangle, created by the value 16 on the demand curve, 4 on the supply curve, and then the equilibrium, that triangle is worth $12. We know that, and that is an area of deadweight loss. So a deadweight loss occurs when a market is actually moved away from the efficient level, i.e. in this case the efficient level is market equilibrium.